My favorite superhero of all time is the Amazing Spider-Man. Like most people who grew up in the early 2000s, I got a whole bunch of fantastic Spidey stories to help me fully appreciate the Wallcrawler. I'll always have a spot for the 90s animated show in my heart, and I personally really enjoyed the new animated series when I watched that. I, of course, loved Spectacular Spider-Man because I have eyes and ears and a brain. I loved Tobey growing up, really enjoyed Andrew Garfield's portrayal, and have enjoyed where Tom Holland and the MCU have taken the character despite some bumps in the road. And originally, the MCU was going to get an animated origin series with this show. It took a while to come out, and it isn't exactly a direct origin of MCU Spidey, but the show is finally here, and it's the first animated Spider-Man show in a while. The last two weren't super well received, and this one sounded promising at the start, but unfortunately got some bad press right before it released due to some shaky looking visuals and some odd comments by the lead actor. However, the show is out, and it's got a whole lot more moving parts than just those issues. So you might be wondering, whether you're a true believer or just a casual fan of the web-slinger, is this show actually good? Well, today I'm here to let you know my thoughts as a lifelong fan, and hopefully I can reiterate why the show is actually pretty great, or maybe I can get you interested if you're on the fence. So let's get started. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man takes place in, of course, New York City. However, it's a very unique version of this world because it's an MCU adjacent world. This universe has a lot of familiar aspects to the MCU. The Avengers already exist, they fought Ultron, they went through the Sokovia Accords. Spidey even has a few moments that are directly referencing scenes from his first appearance in Civil War. But despite all that, there are also a lot of differences. Major ones include the fact that the spider that bites him comes from a different universe. Instead of Tony Stark taking Pete under his wing, Norman Osborn is instead the one to do so. There's no Ned, MJ, and Flash, but instead Harry, Nico, and Lonnie. All these elements make for a very odd show when you think about it. We have a lot of familiar things, yet a lot of new things that are also old things that come from different parts of Marvel or different periods in Spidey's history. It's all a little confusing and almost off-putting at first, but as the story goes on, it actually makes for a pretty interesting and refreshing take on the origin of a 63-year-old hero. And the main driving force of the show is definitely the story, but more specifically, the characters. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is getting yet another origin story. And when I initially learned this, I was a little indifferent. As time went on and the look and vibes of this series were shown more, I thought that this might not fit Pete all that well. Since he's gotten countless origins already, and this show has a bit of an emphasis on Harlem as well as Black and Latino communities, I thought, why don't they use our other friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Miles Morales? However, after watching the show, I realized that this series does suit Pete and his supporting cast, which may be full of familiar faces, but there are plenty of new ones as well that make this story feel very fresh, and Miles could easily become a part of the supporting cast in the future. Sorry, I just really want more Miles. I love him. But for a Peter Parker interpretation, I think this one is pretty stellar. When I was watching the first episode, I was like almost looking for stuff to hate or get annoyed at, but there were two moments that immediately swayed me. The first one is when Nico Minoru is attacked by the alien and Peter immediately rushes to help her. And this is before he has any powers or even knows Nico. This is just a random dude saving a random girl, and that is the perfect way to show who Peter is at his core. Later in the same episode, he stops this woman who stole money from this pizza shop owner, and Spider-Man argues on the woman's behalf. She mentions that she lost her job and stole the money out of instinct. So Spidey asked the owner to cut her some slack instead of immediately calling the cops. Both these moments let me know that Pete would be portrayed very well here. And there's a lot of other good moments too, but those are spoilery, so I'll save those for when I talk about story specifics. Aside from Pete, we of course have plenty of his friends and family. Aunt May is here, and she is very reminiscent of the Marissa Tomei version. May is very supportive and laid back, but still wants to take care of Peter because he's the closest family member she still has. You also have the Osborns. Harry Osborn is like you would typically imagine. He's rich, popular, he drives a nice car, he knows Luna Snow.
I am ready to put on a show!
And despite all that, Harry is actually quite lonely because all his friends are famous as well and only want to hang out for business or vanity reasons. Harry making friends with Pete shines a light on how the young Osborn is a little spoiled and selfish at times, but in his heart he means well and really wants to make a connection with someone like Peter. His father, on the other hand, is a little more complicated. Norman Osborn is this universe's mentor figure for Spidey. He gets Pete an internship at Oscorp because of his talented mind, but it turns out that he was is actually trying to find Spider-Man. You immediately think that things will go bad when he finds out his identity because of who Norman is in every other story, but it turns out that he is a bit more altruistic this time. Norman wanted to thank Spider-Man for saving Harry in the first episode and wants to help him become a better hero so he can keep the city safe. And that's how Norman is for most of the series, but later on we see that he still has a lot of his own goals at the forefront of his mind and begins to ignore Peter or steer him in a dangerous direction. But he never fully, completely means to do harm to Pete, so this iteration of Norman is a very complex guy as a result. We also have Peter's best friend, Nico Minoru. Nico is not typically a Spider-Man character, and a lot of people who are more casual Marvel fans might not even know who she is, because she's a character originally from The Runaways. I personally don't know much about her myself either. I only know about her from Midnight Suns and Ultimate X-Men, which she's in, but isn't super prominent, at least not in the issues that I read. But I know she does magic and has a staff, and her necklace looks a lot like that staff, so she's probably going to end up doing some magic at some point. Aside from that, she is a nice addition to the show, and I like seeing her and Pete's relationship, as well as her interactions with Harry later on, which are pretty fun to watch. The last supporting character I want to mention is kind of a secondary protagonist. So, there's this Jock character, and I saw him all over the promotional stuff, and I kept thinking, alright, who is this guy? Is that this version of Flash? Is he Randy Robertson? Is he maybe Hobie Brown? But to my surprise, he's a character who isn't typically in school with Peter. This is Lonnie Lincoln, and if you're a Spider-Man fan, you know exactly who that is. Lonnie looks like the typical jock guy initially, but in the first episode he changes Peter and the audience's perception by being an actual cool guy. He's the famous school quarterback, but he also has an interest in science and wants to work with Pete because he wants to have multiple opportunities open to him aside from football. He and Peter actually get along pretty well, even though Lonnie is also dating Peter's crush, but their friendship is nice, and Lonnie seems like he's got everything going his way in life. That quickly changes, however, when the focus turns away from Peter and goes to Lonnie. The first episode takes some time to follow Lonnie home to Harlem, which is in a rougher part of the city where he has to keep looking over his shoulder, and not just because of criminals. We see that he has a loving family, but they're struggling, so he's trying to give them a better life by working as hard as possible in school. This is a really endearing way to show Lonnie, and it makes us care for him just as much as Peter. So it's extra painful when you see the third episode where he goes to rescue his little brother from joining a gang, only to be coerced into joining it himself. And again, if you know Spider-Man and you know the name Lonnie Lincoln, you know from the beginning that his story won't stay as happy as it seemed to be at the start. There are plenty of other characters that show up in this series that are from all across the Marvel Universe, and they all have a pretty good place in the story. And now I'll go ahead and talk about that story. Also, I was trying to keep these first two sections mostly spoiler-free, but for the next two discussions, I'm going to go ahead and talk about everything. So skip to this timestamp if you don't want any spoilers, or come back later. Just like the characters, this story has a lot of familiar elements to it. Pete gets bit by a spider, he learns how to use his powers for good, both on his own and with the help of others. He meets a lot of villains along the way, some more dangerous than others, and he meets some heroes as well. He has a friend who has a slowly building tragic backstory that will be a bit of a secret for a while, probably until it's too late to fix things. He's got friends who have to learn to deal with his double life, and vice versa. He has to learn to deal with letting them in if they choose to help him. Most of this stuff is common in Spidey stories, but this series does a great job at adding small or large twists to the plot. The spider isn't just random, but it's actually from another dimension. And that's what you think at first. It's actually from the future because the Doctor Strange fight from the first episode is from the last episode, and everything is actually a time loop, and this is really weird and not something you typically see with Spider-Man, but it actually works pretty well and makes the story more refreshing. The usage of Norman Osborn is fantastic because he initially seems like the kind of character that people wanted Tony to be in the MCU movies. A lot of people think that Tony has way too much involvement with Spidey in those movies, but here Norman tries to help Pete and tries to give him what he needs to be the best Spider-Man he can be. And that's made more interesting because Norman has some selfish tendencies that come out. He pushes some ideas on Pete a little too harshly, and ultimately, Spidey has to become his own hero through his determination and the help of his close friends, not a mentor. Also, using a character like Tombstone in the role of a character like Eddie Brock is very engaging. Instead of using a character with a pre-existing tragic backstory, they decide to give one to Lonnie Lincoln that would connect him much more with Peter. So we get to see this compelling character transformation that will hit very hard when he fully becomes Tombstone and probably has to fight Spidey or maybe even Pete. There's so many possibilities with their relationship, and that probably wouldn't be as interesting if it was something like an Eddie or Harry or Flash story that we've seen before. There are so many elements of this story to talk about, and so many characters that could show up again in the future. A bunch of villains were set up here in the background, like Chameleon, Rhino, and Doc Ock, who was clearly set up to return. But there's one very fascinating story thread that I'm dying to see. And before I talk about that, I gotta mention something from the current Spidey comics. No, not those. I don't read those. These. In Ultimate Spider-Man, not to be confused with Ultimate Spider-Man or Ultimate Spider-Man or Ultimate Spider-Man, but in Ultimate Spider-Man 2024, Peter isn't a teenager or in his 20s, but is actually in his 30s and is married to MJ with 2 kids. That's a pretty big departure from typical Spidey stories, and there are other big things like the fact that Uncle Ben is alive. Having this character that is almost ever present in the rest of the stories but isn't actually there makes for really interesting moments. And at the end of Friendly Neighborhood, they tease Mr. Parker being in this story as well. And I initially thought it was going to be Ben in jail because I didn't remember them saying Ben died. They said he was gone, not dead, so I thought that was going to be a cool twist. I even wrote that in my notes. But then immediately my mind was blown even more because it's not Ben Parker, but Richard Parker. Now this is an insane setup here. We never see Peter's parents in Spidey stories. The last time they tried, to my knowledge, was Amazing Spider-Man 2, which sucked. Oh, here's my ranking of Spidey movies, by the way. And they used Richard a little bit in the Ultimate game and I think the comics. But to my knowledge, he's never been alive at the same time as Pete or been in jail. Or been voiced by Josh Keaton.
How's my son doing?
Let's go, more spectacular representation. This is so sick. Setting this up for a second season that we know we're getting is so exciting and enticing. And it's really weird to think that I went from sort of being interested in watching the show as like an obligation to being so pumped for more of it. I think they do some really great things with the story, and while not everything is super unique or unpredictable, they have so many options for where they can go from here. Let's just hope they stick to landing. And now I want to talk about some of the underlying themes that are present in the story that stuck out to me and further enhanced the quality of this series. There are plenty of common Spidey themes present here. Doing what's right, helping out people, no matter if they deserve it or not. But one thing that stuck out a lot to me was the idea that circumstances in life and the way people navigate them can cause their lives to turn out completely differently. This is very clear with Pete and Lonnie because they are actually both in pretty similar situations at the start. Both of them aren't very wealthy, their families are struggling in some way, but they both try hard to make their lives and others' lives better. However, due to circumstances beyond their control, they end up in very different places. This is perfectly shown in episode 3, where Pete begins working closely with Norman and gets to go straight to the top of the world he has been aspiring to be in. While on the flip side, Lonnie is forced to join the 110 in order to save his brother and is brought straight to the bottom of the world he was dreading to be in. This is a very interesting dynamic to watch unfold, and it doesn't automatically change either character. In the final battle with Scorpion, Spidey almost loses it and beats down Gargan a little too hard, and he's only stopped by Lonnie, who is fully invested in the gang by now. Even though these characters are in opposite places morally, they aren't completely good or evil people. This is all pretty impressive for a Spider-Man cartoon, and this show overall is a bit more mature. Now it's not quite like the MTV show, but it's got some more grown-up stuff. They say bad words like hell and damn and crap. There's some more adult concepts of gangs and targeted crimes, and that also leads to more violence. In most other Spider-Man cartoons and other superhero shows, the guns are always like lasers or something, but here they're actual real guns with bullets. And this episode with Scorpion is really violent. Like, Spidey gets stabbed and is partially covered in blood. This guy gets executed. Like, damn, man, I don't think you should show this to a 5-year-old. But yeah, these themes aren't treating the audience like children. They're showing lifelong fans how these characters might deal with some more realistic situations, and they're showing younger audiences that life can be quite complicated. You can be down on your luck and rise above everything like Pete, and you can work hard for what you want, yet life can throw you such a curveball that you won't even recognize yourself, like Lonnie. And obviously Lonnie is a bit different because he's a comic book character, but I'm sure something similar to this has happened in someone's life. So while the story and characters are fun and exciting, I really appreciate that they're at least slightly touching on some more mature concepts here. I'm sure they're never gonna go too far because this is still Disney, but it's nice to get something. Hopefully this stuff will be expanded upon more in the next season. And now that I've been praising this show so heavily for a while, how about we get into some of the weaker elements, like the visuals. The visuals were a major thing that stuck out and turned people away from the show in the beginning. When this trailer released, they showcased some of the weakest scenes, so naturally people felt like this animation looked very bad. This art style looks more 2D, but being combined with the 3D animation makes certain scenes like this first swinging one look strange. Spidey looks like he goes fast at times, and then he feels like he slows down. Also, the 3D environment looks very lifeless in this scene especially. It doesn't look too bad when it's focused on Spidey, but when you can see the streets in the background with little to no cars or people in New York City of all places, it looks barren and doesn't feel very natural. And you could argue that this is Queens, not Manhattan, so there would be less people, but there are other scenes in later episodes where they have more people around. There are still noticeable problems, like the fact that cars and people just stop at a certain point, like the render distance is turned down or something. And most of the normal conversations feel sort of stiff at times. I don't know how to fully explain my thoughts on this, but some of the animation just looks and feels off, which is unfortunate because the art style actually looks pretty good throughout the series. There are some bland designs for some of the villains, but the main cast and all of Spidey's outfits look pretty incredible. Even the side heroes have banger designs. Also, the animation isn't always terrible. There are some fight scenes that can actually feel fluid and feel more exciting, like the ideal Spidey fights do. Spider-Man is quick and nimble, while Scorpion is slow but weighty. His stinger hits fast but hard. And Daredevil is a great example because everything he does seems like it has a purpose. He feels like he's flowing through combat, not just swinging wildly. And that looks good visually as well as fits the character. Also, going back to the art style, I really love how they show the different designs for each of the characters in the outro. Seeing the progress of those and then seeing the final result is really neat, and not something you typically see outside of behind the scenes footage. It's also a little reminiscent of the 90s cartoon because they showed some fun art in that outro as well. Another thing that's really cool is the usage of these comic panels throughout the series. They use these quite a lot and it makes the world feel more unique and fun. The panels are almost interactive as well, because you can focus on the big picture like the story wants you to, or you can focus on something smaller in the same frame, which is kind of like a comic book. So while the animation can feel a bit off at times, I personally got used to it and I really love the art style. The designs are great and feel classic yet modern, and I love that. Something else that is a good blend of classic and modern is the music. The music of Friendly Neighborhood is a mix of a new score and some licensed songs. There are a few songs that are played during big moments for Spidey. They even use that exact Alt-J song from the first appearance sequence from Civil War. They also use Daredevil's theme when he shows up. Holy shit, look at him, dude. He looks so good and his fighting style is so sick, and he's Charlie Cox and he's got such a great blend of seriousness and levity with his dialogue. God, he's so awesome. Stream Daredevil Born Again on Disney Plus March 4th. Sorry, my bad. And all that music is fine, but the two songs that stick out the most are definitely the intro and outro themes. The intro is a remixed version of the classic iconic Spider-Man theme from the original cartoon. At first it sounds a little odd, but I quickly got used to it and actually really like this version. And if you think they shouldn't mess with the original song or something, it's not like this is the first time it's been remixed. And it's pretty cool that they even have an intro. Like, the last two series had intros and themes, but it was just the logo popping up. Animated shows that don't have these traditional intros just feel wrong to me. So the intro's pretty cool, but the real piece of music that stands above the rest for me is the outro theme, which is like this Spidey's main theme. This outro is such a banger, dude. It just feels so right for Spider-Man. It's fast-paced and energetic, triumphant and heroic, and just really fantastic as a piece of superhero music. I gotta be honest, this theme is one of the major reasons I even decided to make a video about this show. It got me so hyped and put so much Spidey love back into my heart. I listened to it on repeat for like an hour after I watched episode 5 and decided to make this. All my thoughts and opinions just started flowing, and that was all thanks to this theme. Spidey of course has his classic 60s theme, theme, but there are so many other classic themes that have spawned from the other shows and the movies and the games, and it's just so impressive that everyone can have a different iconic Spidey theme in their head, and it will probably still be amazing. And with that, I think I've reached the end of my thoughts on Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Like I mentioned, I initially was kinda interested in the show, then was probably only gonna watch 1 or 2 episodes, but now I'm pretty invested and really like this direction they're taking the story and the characters. It's not perfect, and I personally don't think it's the best Spider-Man show or anything, but I was pleasantly surprised, and I hope that we're in for a lot more good stuff. While I was making this, we actually got a little tease for Season 2, so I'm hoping they can put some more unique and interesting spins on some classic characters. I hope I did a good job explaining why the show is pretty good, and if you still haven't seen it, I hope you check it out and enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you very much for watching. See you around, webheads. I don't need to do this, but I thought this would be a fun thing to add to the end of the video. I want to show you some drawings I did when I was in like 4th or 5th grade. Just want to prove that I really am a lifelong fan, so my opinions in this video were all correct, and you cannot argue with me, because I drew Spider-Man badly 18 years ago. Also, I guess Super Spider was my Spider-Sona before that whole trend started, and it looks like I created Spider-Boy before Marvel did. I'll take those royalties now, thank you. If you enjoyed my video, feel free to check out some other ones. And if you want some more Spidey content, I 100%ed all the Insomniac games over on my second channel, so go watch those. Thanks again.